Jack Malone had always believed in the power of the land. The ranch he ran was more than just a job. It was his life. For over 2 decades, Jack had worked the land, learned its rhythms, and faced the challenges it brought with a calm, steady hand. At 44, Jack was no stranger to hard work, tough decisions, and the occasional danger. But even a man like him, who had faced wild animals, unpredictable weather, and more than one showdown with cattle rustlers, wasn't prepared for the strange turn his life would take that autumn. Jack's ranch was far away from the nearest town, nestled in the heart of the plains. He liked the isolation, the quiet. He didn't have many people in his life, only a small group of trusted workers who helped maintain the farm. Most of his interactions with the outside world were quick trips to town for supplies or to check in with the sheriff about local goings-on. It was on one of these trips that Jack first noticed her, Clara Green. She appeared like a shadow in the corner of his eye, sitting alone at a small table in the local diner. Jack, used to seeing familiar faces, couldn't recall ever seeing her before. She had pale skin that seemed to glow faintly in the dim light of the diner, and her eyes, a piercing shade of blue, gave her an almost otherworldly presence. Her hair was wild and untamed, as if she had just come in from a storm, though there hadn't been one that day. She looked like someone who didn't belong in a small, quiet town like theirs. Yet something about her suggested that she had been here much longer than anyone realized. Their first conversation was brief. Jack, never one for small talk, had simply asked for a coffee to go. But when he saw her again the following day, he decided to take a chance and sit down at her table. Her aloof demeanor intrigued him. "I'm Jack." He introduced himself, trying to break the silence. "I know," she said quietly, as if she had been expecting him. "Clara." For a moment, neither of them spoke. There was a strange, quiet understanding between them. But Jack couldn't put his finger on why it felt so different from the usual brief exchanges he had with strangers. They started talking more often over the next few weeks. Clara spoke in a soft, almost hypnotic way, telling Jack about the places she had been and the people she had met. Her stories were always a little vague, never giving away too much, but there was an air of mystery about her that kept Jack's interest piqued. She would tell him about small towns she had lived in, lands she had wandered through, and the strange people she had encountered along the way. Her tales often seemed to be more about what she hadn't done than what she had. But Jack never pressed her to reveal more. Something told him that Clara wasn't someone who easily opened up. As days turned into weeks, Jack began to notice something odd. Clara always had a strange sense of calm, as if she never got rattled by anything. She was unbothered by the bustle of town life, unaffected by the loud noises, and hardly ever seemed to be in a rush. While Jack was always moving, always working, she moved at her own pace. She would often appear at the diner when Jack stopped in, and the two of them would chat for a while. He couldn't help but feel drawn to her. There was an odd connection between them, even if neither of them really understood it. One evening, as the sun set and the air grew colder, Clara came to Jack's ranch with an unusual request. She had always been a little mysterious, but this time, she seemed almost urgent. Jack had just finished feeding the horses when she appeared at the gate, looking as calm as ever, but with a strange look in her eyes. "I need your help, Jack," she said quietly, standing at the entrance. Her voice was soft, but there was something in her tone that made Jack pause. She had never asked for anything before, and he wasn't sure what to make of her sudden change in demeanor. "Help with what?" Jack asked, wiping his hands on his jeans. "There's a group of outlaws in the area," Clara said, her gaze intense. "They've been stealing cattle and causing trouble for the local ranchers. I know where they are, and I can help you find them. But you'll need to trust me." Jack raised an eyebrow. Trust was something he didn't give out easily. He had learned long ago that in his line of work, trust had to be earned. Still, there was something in Clara's eyes that made him consider her offer. He knew about the rustlers, of course. The sheriff had been on their trail for weeks, but no one had been able to pin them down. Could Clara really know where they were? "Why don't you go to the sheriff with this information?" Jack asked, still a little skeptical. "I can't," Clara replied, her voice dropping a notch. "I've been watching them, but if the sheriff gets involved, they'll scatter. They're too dangerous to be caught off guard." Jack didn't fully understand what she meant, but he knew there was something in her tone that made it clear she wasn't someone who panicked easily. There was no fear in her voice, no hesitation. She was sure of herself. "I can help," she added, her eyes never leaving his. "But I'll need you to play a part in this. I'll need you to help set a trap for them." Jack thought about it for a moment. He didn't like the idea of using a woman as bait, but he couldn't deny that Clara seemed to know what she was talking about. And if she was right about the outlaws, maybe it was worth the risk. Jack was used to danger after all. He had faced it many times before. What kind of trap? Jack asked, curiosity getting the better of him. Clara smiled faintly. A simple one. I'll be the bait. I'll make sure they notice me, alone, vulnerable. Once they take the bait, we can spring the trap and catch them. Jack hesitated, a feeling of unease settling in his stomach. You'll be alone? Out there? What if something goes wrong? I won't let anything happen, Clara said, her tone unshakable. Trust me, Jack, you'll be watching. You'll be close enough to help if you need to. Jack stared at her for a long moment, weighing the risks. He didn't like the idea of putting Clara in harm's way, but he also knew that sometimes desperate times called for desperate measures. If this worked, it could save the ranchers and the town a lot of trouble. All right, Jack said finally, nodding. I'll do it. Clara's smile grew a little wider, and for a moment Jack almost felt as if he had made a mistake. But it was too late now. He had agreed to her plan, and there was no turning back. As they discussed the details, Clara whispered something under her breath, almost too softly for Jack to hear. I'm just bait, she said, her voice carrying an eerie calm. Jack didn't think much of it at the time. It was just part of the plan, or so he thought. The night was colder than usual as Jack stood hidden behind a cluster of trees, his breath forming clouds in the crisp air. The only sounds were the rustling of the wind in the leaves and the distant calls of night creatures. He hadn't expected the night to feel so heavy with silence. As he looked towards the clearing where Clara was, he felt a knot tighten in his stomach. The plan had seemed simple enough when they discussed it, but now, watching her sitting alone in the open, the fear began to creep in. Jack had grown up on the land. He was used to dangers, wolves, wild storms, and even the occasional unruly rancher who thought they could make a name by causing trouble. But tonight, something felt different. Something about Clara, about this situation, made the air feel thick with tension. He couldn't explain it, but his instincts, honed over years of hard work and careful observation, were telling him that this wasn't just another job. This wasn't just another trap to catch a few rustlers. Clara had positioned herself in the center of the clearing, sitting on a large rock as if she were waiting for something, or perhaps someone. Her posture was unnervingly calm, her shoulders relaxed, and her eyes, those strange blue eyes, seemed distant, staring into the darkness. There was no fear in her, none at all. Jack glanced over at his men who were stationed in the trees, watching, ready to move at a moment's notice. They had all been given their instructions. Wait for the signal, stay hidden, and spring the trap. Clara had insisted on doing this alone, saying that the outlaws would be more likely to approach if they saw her as an easy target. But Jack couldn't shake the feeling that Clara wasn't just playing the role of bait, she was the one in control. As the minutes passed, the weight in Jack's chest grew heavier. His eyes never left Clara as he strained to hear any sound in the night, any sign of movement. His mind raced, wondering if he should call out, ask if she was okay. But he knew the plan. He had to wait. He had to trust that Clara knew what she was doing. Then, after what felt like an eternity, he heard it. A faint sound in the distance. The slow thud of hooves, the unmistakable rhythm of horses. Jack's heart skipped a beat. He motioned to his men to remain still, his hand signaling that it was time. The outlaws had arrived. As the hooves grew louder, Jack's grip tightened on his rifle. He peeked out from behind the tree and saw the silhouettes of several riders approaching. They weren't moving fast, but they were focused, heading straight for Clara. Jack's eyes narrowed as he recognized the lead rider. It was Victor Lane, the leader of the outlaw gang. A ruthless man with a reputation for cruelty, Lane had been on the sheriff's radar for months. But if Jack had his way, tonight would be the end of it. The gang approached Clara slowly, their horses making soft snorting sounds as they neared the clearing. Clara didn't flinch. She didn't move a muscle, just stared ahead, her face as calm as ever. Jack's stomach churned and he almost stepped forward. But he held himself back. Victor Lane and his gang dismounted a few feet from Clara, eyeing her with the same interest a predator might give a cornered animal. Well, what do we have here? Victor said, his voice low and rough. A pretty little thing all alone in the middle of nowhere. Don't you know this land is ours? Clara looked up at him, her expression unreadable. I'm just passing through, she said softly, her voice almost hypnotic. There was no fear in her words, no panic. She spoke as if she had all the time in the world, as if nothing about this situation was strange at all. Victor laughed, a harsh, mocking sound that echoed in the quiet night. Passing through, huh? Don't think I've seen you around here before. What's your name? Clara, she replied, still unmoving. Victor studied her for a moment, then nodded to one of his men. Tie her up. We'll take her with us. She'll fetch a nice price down at the market. The outlaw grabbed a rope and began to approach her, but just as he reached for her arm, something strange happened. Clara stood up slowly, her movements fluid and graceful. The outlaw froze, staring at her as if something about her had changed in that instant. Clara's blue eyes, now shimmering in the moonlight, seemed to glow unnaturally. She raised her hand and the air around them seemed to shift, growing thick and heavy. Stop, Clara said softly, and her voice was different now. There was an almost musical quality to it, a power in her tone that made the men hesitate. It was as if the very air had changed, vibrating with something ancient and powerful. The outlaw, still holding the rope, took a step back, clearly unsure of what was happening. The other outlaws looked at each other, confused, unsure if they should move or stay. Victor Lane, however, didn't appear as rattled. He had seen many things in his time, but something about Clara's presence unsettled him. You think you can stop us? Victor sneered, stepping forward. You're nothing but a lost girl in the wild. Clara didn't respond with words.
Instead, she raised both hands, her fingers curling as if she were gathering something from the air itself.
The wind picked up suddenly, howling through the trees, and the ground beneath their feet seemed to tremble. For the first time, the men seemed to sense something was wrong. Jack could see them start to back away, their eyes wide with confusion and fear, but it was too late. The ground shook harder, and the very trees around the clearing groaned as if under pressure. Clara's presence was no longer something that could be ignored. She was commanding the night itself. Leave, Clara whispered, her voice now a low, haunting command. The outlaws stood frozen, unable to move. Their eyes darted around looking for an escape, but there was no escape from her power. The wind intensified, whipping through the clearing, pulling at their clothes and hair as if nature itself was rising to her command. Jack watched, his heart pounding in his chest. He had been wrong. Clara was not just a woman caught in a dangerous game. She was the one who had set the trap, the one who had lured them all here. The realization hit him like a bolt of lightning. Clara wasn't just bait. She was the hunter. Victor Lane tried to speak again, but his voice was lost in the wind. Clara's eyes narrowed, and she took a step toward him. You have no power here, she said, her voice clear and final. In that moment, everything changed. The men who had once thought of Clara as an easy target now understood the truth. They had walked straight into her web. They were the prey, not her. Jack didn't know whether to run or stay. He was frozen in place, watching as the outlaws began to tremble, their faces pale with fear. The trap had been set, but not in the way he had expected. And then, just as quickly as it had started, Clara lowered her hands, and the wind died down. The shaking ground stilled. The outlaws, now trembling and scared, realized they had no control over the situation. They were at her mercy. Clara turned slowly, her eyes still glowing with that strange, unsettling light. This game is over, she said softly. Jack, still in disbelief, could only watch as Clara's power unfolded before him, knowing that he had made a terrible mistake. The real danger wasn't the outlaws, it had always been her.